Welcome to Toasty Gaming. Today we will look at why the reviews for Dragon Age the Veilguard are so divisive and how we can make some sense from that polarization. Since the review embargo dropped yesterday, it almost feels like there are two realities surrounding this game. Some reviewers go as far as calling it the best entry into the series, whereas others call it boring and barely enjoyable. Now, because a lot of people say that this is simply explained because different people have different opinions, I feel like it's important to point out that a review isn't supposed to just be a subjective opinion. A review is supposed to first judge the objective quality of craftsmanship of whatever is being reviewed and then provide an opinion. And most reviewers I saw did just that. I generally find it weird that in entertainment, people seem to often oversee that aspects like gameplay, writing, design, etc. are objective. If you would review a chair, for example, no one would say that the quality of the wood that has been used or whether the joints fit together are subjective matters. Just because video games appear more complex, that doesn't change the fact that game design is a craft like any other, and therefore it is possible to objectively judge the quality of a game's design and therefore the game's quality. You can personally like or dislike a game's areas, but if aspects like the level design fail to produce areas that would be expected of the action RPG genre and fail to adhere to the objective psychological rules of what makes a level fun and enjoyable, then the level design is objectively bad, even if you personally like it. But enough about the objectivity of reviews. Let's look at why Veilguard is so divisive. The first and most obvious divide is the one between many YouTubers and the large gaming media outlets. I believe this one can be very simply explained. An independent reviewer on YouTube is fully reliant on their audience and therefore will try to be as critical as expected by their community, because positively reviewing a bad game will massively hurt their standing. This leads to reviews generally being quite critical and detailed. Games journalists, on the other hand, rely on the goodwill of big publishers to receive exclusive access to various projects. This means that they will always try to paint the most positive picture of a game to retain their exclusive access. Media outlets generate most of their traffic not from loyal readers, but from people who want to look at some exclusive information these outlets can provide due to their special access. This means that the reviews of gaming media outlets will almost always be positive unless a product is so subpar that even a blind and deaf comatose patient could tell the game is bad. Considering that this divide is easily explained, the much more interesting differences are the ones between various reviewers on YouTube. Having watched hours worth of reviews and ignoring the culture war content, I would say that the reviews on YouTube have a roughly 50-50 split between positive and negative reviews. To make sense of this divide, we need to use a bit of a meta-study approach, a meta-review if you will, that tries to organize the various reviews into a cohesive overview. To start off, I try to categorize the reviews along more lines than just positive or bad, in the hopes of finding some common traits between reviews which are positive and reviews which are negative. In my search, I stumbled upon an excellent statement from a German reviewer who said that Dragon Age the Veilguard is very difficult to review because you can review it in so many different ways and as so many different things. You can review the game as a continuation of the Dragon Age franchise, as the big title that is supposed to save BioWare and prove to the world that they can still make RPGs. You can review the Veilguard as an action game or as an RPG, and you can also review it as a new product that wants to stand on its own, instead of a continuation of a long tradition of video games. Inspired by that opinion, I decided to categorize reviews along 6 aspects. Are the reviews positive or negative? Do they judge Veilguard as an RPG or as an action game? And do they see Veilguard as the title that carries the torch of traditional BioWare, or as a modern game that stands on its own in a modern gaming market? With that categorization, I saw some clear results. Positive reviews for Dragon Age the Veilguard almost always judge the game as an action title. They see it as a product that stands on its own, rarely comparing it to its predecessors, and they generally also focus more on aspects relevant to an action game. By this I mean that they mostly talk about the combat, leveling, etc., whereas aspects like the writing or the atmosphere of the world are judged as good enough for an action game without going into too much detail. I would say a really good review that also serves as an archetype for this category would be the one by Mortismal. Negative reviews, on the other hand, usually judge the game as an RPG and focus heavily on comparisons with previous titles. Judging Veilguard as an RPG leads to a focus on the story, the writing quality, the companions, as well as how the world and its design hold up to the predecessors and other RPGs. The gameplay, on the other hand, is only reviewed cursory and often quite negatively, although it seems clear that such reviews couldn't really be bothered to deal with the new action-heavy combat. An archetypical and excellent review from this category would be the one by Skill Up. Now, what can we say overall based on those two large groups of reviews? It seems that overall, with some exceptions, even the positive reviews point out that this game is clearly a clean slate for BioWare, almost an attempt to create and sharpen a new profile for the developer, as a reviewer said. The combat has absolutely nothing to do with an RPG anymore. It focuses fully on action. Positive reviews drew comparisons to the combat of God of War Ragnarok or Witcher 3, so I would expect at least solid action combat, but I don't think that's what most people wanted. Even positive reviews call the writing slightly shallow at times, but generally maintain that BioWare provides a light-hearted, feel-good story with likable characters and a generally quite cheery tone. What critics would consider lacking depth, the positive reviews consider a comfortable companion system with a slight old-school feel. You still build your reputation via companion quests that slow down the main story for at least an hour after any major main story event, but which allow you to get to know still quite interesting companions. Your romance paths are basically just spamming the hard option all the time, and then everything will work out, but that still feels reminiscent of traditional role-playing games in a way, and therefore isn't considered overly negative. Critics maintain that this story isn't feel-good, but kindergarten levels of safe. Companions don't have any real conflicts, characters that are called likable and charming are considered not serious and complex enough in the negative reviews. The fact that everyone always tells you how they feel without you having to make any judgments of your own is considered shallow and unfitting for the Dragon Age genre, as well as the utter inability to anger any characters. Critics maintain that your protagonist doesn't feel like a leader who has to make difficult calls to save the world, but like a bit of a kindergarten teacher who sometimes has to deal with petty squabbles that are feeling irrelevant before the backdrop of basically the entire world being at risk of being destroyed. Additionally, the companion quests that basically block the main story and the romance options that see you flirt, even at the most inopportune moments, are considered dated, at times a bit boring, and as clearly inferior to Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3, as a fellow RPG, is generally often used as a comparison for story and characters in negative reviews. As far as the new design direction goes, positive reviews call it an interesting and unique choice that will clearly be divisive but which they personally quite like. Negative reviews point out that particularly in the character design, the new graphics direction leads to problems, pointing out that the Kunari, for example, just look like Play-Doh-faced guys with horns now. Once again, drawing comparisons to older titles, particularly Inquisition, where Kunari looked very rough and gruff in their design. As far as the environments are concerned, I even saw quite a few negative reviews point out that they looked optically very pleasant, even if the level design is mid at best and many locations don't really feel sprawling or alive, and more like action tunnels, one could almost call them. Alright, so based on this very cursory summary of some of the main points from both negative and positive reviews, I think we can quite clearly conclude who will like and dislike the game. If you are a fan of RPGs and expect deep, complex writing and combat with equally complex characters, then this game is most likely not for you. As a BioWare fan, you should most likely not buy this game unless you want to be disappointed. The only exception are die-hard Dragon Age fans, who really want to see the overall story come to an end. It has been said even in the negative reviews that the last 2 hours of the game are clearly the best. Additionally, it was pointed out that some returning characters like Stolas are written very well and are a league above your companions in terms of quality. If you are willing to accept an action-based combat system and maybe want to re-experience that classic BioWare way of handling companions and a story, even with worse writing than before, then this game might also be worth a buy. I believe it's also important to point out that even the negative reviews said that this is the best BioWare game in this decade, basically. Mostly saying that it's worse than Dragon Age Inquisition, but still better than Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem. even although that's not really a major achievement. That's also important to point out, I believe. This isn't a Mass Effect Andromeda levels of horrible game, at least from what most of the reviews are saying. As someone who has absolutely nothing to do with BioWare, you have to ask yourself whether you want to buy an average action game with an average or maybe slightly above average level of story and companions, depending on whether you still like shallow feel-good writing. Veilguard seems to have AAA production weight and is releasing in a generally quite weak year for RPGs and action games. You do need to keep in mind though that 2025 will have a very strong release lineup in that area, with titles like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 already releasing in February, and titles like Avowed, Outcast, Outer World 2, the Gothic remake, and many more following close behind, and quality-wise most likely easily outperforming Dragon Age the Veilguard. My personal conclusion about this game, after having watched almost a dozen reviews as well as having read quite a few reviews by various gaming media outlets, is that Dragon Age the Veilguard won't be good enough to save BioWare in this decisive phase for the company. Veilguard as a game just doesn't have enough meat on the bone to be a massive AAA success. What is also important to point out is that the marketing by BioWare clearly didn't help, and I'm specifically talking about this 20-minute character creator video with the surgical scars and other identity politics topics. I didn't mention this in the main part of the video because it isn't as relevant to the quality of the game, and most reviewers also didn't consider this aspect to be overly relevant to the quality of the game. As an example, Baldur's Gate 3 has the very same options, and Baldur's Gate 3 is an excellent title. But it is still important in an overall overview of the reviews I saw to point out just how much this has hurt the chances of BioWare to sell their game to a larger audience. To give you an example, the German-speaking GameStar, the largest gaming media outlet within the German-speaking world with a large, moderately left-leaning audience, had to preface their review with an info box talking about the culture war surrounding the character editor, where they pointed out that some people use this to question the right to exist for trans people, which is obviously crossing every line, but that there are also viable concerns, and if you have issues with things like, for example, being able to choose custom pronouns, this game might not be for you, and they just wanted to give you this information right at the start. This move was viewed quite positively by commenters, but it is also important to point out that the most positive, most liked comment under this article was that someone has just stopped reading because, well, they just read that they can pick random pronouns for their character and that they just won't support this game on principle, and that they were a Dragon Age fan and then had further comments being angry about that. And this was literally the biggest comment thread and the most popular comment thread under this entire article. This was a moderately left-leaning audience, which was actually quite positively pre-inclined towards Dragon Age the Veilguard before all of that. And from this single anecdotal evidence, I can also theoretically give you a dozen more examples of things where this happened. Well, maybe not a dozen, but about 4 or 5 that I've seen where you had situations like that. And this makes it clear to me that this entire identity politics presentation within the marketing just wasn't an intelligent move, no matter what you think about identity politics within games. This was just clearly not a good marketing move that has hurt BioWare down the line. That's also a reason for why I think Dragon Age the Veilguard will struggle to actually come back as this big phoenix from the ashes that will save BioWare. Alright, that would be everything from me. I hope I could give you a useful overview of the divisive reviews surrounding Dragon Age the Veilguard and the potential chances of this game to save BioWare as a company. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Cheers.